What's going on, guys? My name is Hylor, and this is your Total War Warhammer guide to army composition. Before setting out onto the battlefield to control an army, you have to actually have an army to control. You must choose which units to recruit, and with that, a general plan of action against the enemy. In this guide, I will explain a few short steps what I believe are necessary for any army composition. Some of these tips will be slightly altered depending on the faction that you play, so please note the suggested differences based on your faction. In Total War Warhammer, there is a new element that is different than any other previous game in the series. You now have access to generals as well as lords and wizards to command and inspire your army. These lords give leadership or essentially morale boosts to your troops, and when they die, there is a morale or leadership debuff to your troops. To make sure you always have an advantage on your side, I suggest getting a lord and another hero unit that are good at killing other lords and other hero units. For example, as the Empire, I personally get Karl Franz on Deathclaw and a Witch Hunter. I pick Karl Franz because he is the best in a one-on-one fight, and being on Deathclaw, he has the high mobility which will help him get into the fights when he's needed and also avoid fights when he shouldn't be in them. I get a Witch Hunter because as the Empire, he has an ability called Accusation, which does damage over time to a single target. Other characters for other factions have spells similar to this, so I suggest getting those characters to support your main lord as well. When you begin a battle, your lord and your supporting hero are to be kept safe behind your lines until you can engage in combat on your terms and win the fight with the enemy lord and then their supporting characters that they may have. This will give your army a leadership advantage over your opponents. Step 2. Building your main battle line. Your main battle line should be built based on a few core ideas, but which units fit these ideas depend on your faction. These units are meant to be the linebackers or your main defense. The main line will ideally be built up of units with shields because it'll give you added missile protection. This way they can get engaged in melee combat without taking much damage from enemy range units beforehand. This will allow your troops to have as little disadvantage as possible, thus holding as long as possible. It also should not be made up of the best troops from your faction. Not only will this cost more money, but this means that your main troops will be the first ones to be wounded, killed off, or tired from fighting. Lastly, they would ideally be troops meant to kill other infantry to make sure that they can last as long as possible in a fight against the enemy main line. As an example, I would probably use about 4 to 5 swordsman units playing as the Empire. Step 3. Your reserves. Your army should have a second line of reserves, and just like the main line, it should be based on some core ideas, and the units you choose should be different based on your faction. Your second line should be your utility line, the line that has all the specialty skills, and there are 2 skills in particular I believe they should have. The first, and most importantly, is anti-large. Certain units, such as spears, are usually good against large units, which would be cavalry, giants, vargeists, and other such units. Since these units will not be committed to an original fight, you have the flexibility to cover the flanks, to be thrown into the main line if they are attacked by large units, or to protect your range units from flying monsters that may come to attack them. The second skill your reserve unit should have is armored piercing, and ideally as well on those same guys, anti-infantry. This will help you to have troops waiting to see where the trouble spots in your line are and to counter them. Sometimes the enemy throw their best units against your main line and they start to break that particular unit well before the other parts of your line. Having an armor piercing and ideally anti-infantry troop to back them up is crucial. Not only does having that unit there help to re-strengthen the leadership of the unit that was already losing, but allows your best unit to get into combat against their best unit, but only after theirs has lost men and has lost endurance, which will lower their combat skill. You get to put fresh troops that are on their A game against the enemy's tired units and will usually switch that fight quickly to being in your advantage. As always, it's ideal to have these troops shielded as well to help deal with any missile fire they may get while waiting to be committed to a fight, but it's less necessary than your front line. An example Empire reserve line would be 2 spear units, possibly with shields, 2 halberdiers, and 2 greatswords. Step 4. Missile units. I always have a range components of about 2 to 3 units depending on who I am facing. Obviously, if you're playing as the vampires or even chaos, you will not have a range component to your army. I usually stick with normal archers or crossbowmen unless I am going against dwarves or chaos who have more heavily armored units and I need the armor piercing power of a gun missile troop like handgunners. These units are important and should be used in a few key ways. They should be used against high damage melee troops, ideally the ones without shields or armor, such as savage orcs or other units with great weapons. Once those units are engaged in combat, take your range units and focus fire them all on one of the enemy's range units. If you're playing for the dwarves, for example, then go for the gun missile unit first to stop their armor piercing damage for being as substantial as it can be against your heavily armored troops. Go one by one till each one of the enemy's range units rout. From there, I usually have them support the flanks or shoot across the front lines towards the other side to have the best angle on the enemy troops. So my range units on the right side of my line would shoot the enemies on the left side and vice versa. This means less friendly fire against your troops. Also, think about trying to have your missile troops on terrain that's that's higher than your main line. This way they'll have a better angle of attack on the enemy troops. If your missile troops can't see the enemy, they will try to avoid firing to limit friendly fire, but you can also still fire and hit your own troops. If you are one of those factions with little or no range option, then merge step 4 with step 5. An example Empire build would be about 2 to 3 crossbowmen or handgunners. Step 5. Mobility units. Mobility is totally necessary in my book, but as say the dwarves, you have no cavalry. It is possible to switch mobility for range units and forego units like gyrocopters altogether. I would suggest though that if you are the dwarves, then get a unit or 2 more of range units and a unit or 2 more of anti-large to help counter the other factions using cavalry or monsters against you. For mobility, I usually pick cavalry and maybe a flying monster or 2 depending on who I'm playing against. I would say though, ideally, whatever mobility you choose, it should be anti-large. The reason for this is so that you can win any cavalry engagement, thus giving you the mobility advantage, and then you can use them again to counter lords or monsters. Also, the charge of any mobility unit, cavalry or monster, should be used in the rear of a unit, ideally not against a unit that is also anti-large. Rear attacks demoralize enemy troops anyways, so the fact that your unit is not meant to kill infantry won't matter as much. Also, as a mobility unit, it's best to charge your unit in and after a few seconds, get them out of that engagement. Once the unit is far enough away from the enemy, cycle them back into the rear of that same unit. This is best really with a cavalry unit, as flying units are designed by Creative Assembly not to take back off into the air until after a short period of time. As an example, I would pick the Demigryph Knights with halberds. They have tons of armor, tons of weight, and can win almost any cavalry engagement, and their weight and charge bonus will be more than enough to wreck any unit of infantry if they charge them in the rear. To summarize everything, the overall points would be this. First, your lord and his supporting hero should be focused in battle on killing the enemy lord and his supporting heroes. Second, your main line should be shielded and ideally units that can take a decent amount of damage. They should be seen as your defensive line or linebackers to give you a wall that you have to then operate the rest of your units around. Step 3, your reserve line should be your better troops and more versatile troops. You should have anti-large, armor-piercing, and anti-infantry troops in this line. Put them into a fight as needed depending on how the battle plays out. If you have the advantage, then take a unit or 2 and flank the enemy with this reserve line. Watch them to make sure that they don't take too much range fire from enemy missile units. Step number 4, your ranged units should be used to take out lightly armored, non-shielded, highly damaging units and quickly move on to help support either the flanks from attacking mobile units, flying units, or to focus on the enemy ranged units to protect your flanking moves and flying units. Step number 5, your mobility should be used to destroy the enemy's mobile units. Then they should go for artillery, lords, heroes, and charge the enemy's main line, and in that order. Again, your priorities go as follows, typically speaking. Enemy mobile units, then their artillery, then lords and heroes, then the rear charging of an infantry unit. These are guidelines and are not hard and fast rules to fight by, so just see how the battle plays out. Try to make sure your mobile units are being cycled in and out of fights and not just sitting in one substantial fight. This will allow you to use charge bonus, weight, and the fact that you're rear charging enemy units and multiple units to your advantage. And with all of that, that summarizes what I would say is the basic starting point for building an army. If you guys enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to like and share it with your friends, and if you want to see more like it, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. Until next time, my name is Hylor, and I'll see you guys soon.